Hey everybody, let me know if you can at least hear me okay, if not see me okay. Uh, Sorry for that. I was a couple seconds late here. Had to sneak in a little bio break before we get started. Um, let's just go ahead. So this is my graphic, but we can use the NASA graphics because there's more information in them. But um, NASA released the availability calendar, and so it sort of strikes me here. Let me see if I can bring that up. So I basically just kind of did some cut and paste of the information from the calendar just to focus on this is the would be the first available launch period for Artemis II. So it sort of strikes me that the final opportunity for uh, the final opportunity for launch period 17 would be February 11th, and so basically basically we have about 31 days between now and then, and the better part of 5 weeks, but about 4 weeks. NASA's got 4 weeks if they want to launch, get all of the preparations done in the VAB and at the pad to launch in the next month, basically. So where let's see, I'm gonna bring up the so where we are. For the most part, and I put out the video yesterday for members, and then that went public this morning. The uh, the word right now, at least in public, is rollout would be no earlier than next Saturday, January 17th. But there's probably some, it's probably a little squishy, and so I wouldn't be surprised if it slides a shift or two in either direction. Um, and then bigger picture again, rollout rollout around January 17th, wet dress rehearsal towards the end of January, early February, and then they have 5 days in early February where they have opportunities to launch. And you can see those there, February 6th, 7th, 8th, and then the 10th and 11th. Now, those are the dates where the celestial mechanics work, where they don't have any constraints. So, for instance, the ninth is a cutout because, and it's they didn't say specifically, but if we're just going off of information from Artemis 1, one of the constraints they have is an eclipse period. There's a maximum amount of time that the Orion solar, well, it isn't the solar arrays. It's just that the spacecraft the spacecraft has batteries which the solar arrays keep charged, and so when they're in shadow, when they're not getting sunlight, then they're completely working off the batteries, and so you can only go so long, and the limit is 90 minutes. If you were in Earth orbit, for instance, then you're only gonna since there aren't a lot of clouds up there, you're gonna get more or less half the time in sun and half the time in darkness. But those orbits are approximately 90 minutes long, so you would never be more than an hour. And again, for those of you who are familiar with ISS and things like beta angles, you can have situations where, because of the inclination of that orbit, you can be in sunlight the entire orbit, and so then you don't have an eclipse for during certain periods of it's a seasonal kind of thing. But anyway, so that's probably there's probably something like an eclipse constraint for February 9th. But then you also have the other operational constraint of the ability to fuel the vehicle which requires not just the propellants, but other things like, if you remember from Artemis 1, they had issues getting the nitrogen purge, the amount of gaseous nitrogen flowing into the vehicle to keep all of the dry volumes purged during tanking operations. And so hopefully they have worked all the kinks out of that system. They exercise that system a lot in 2022, and then they've all other launch providers use that to some extent, to one extent or another. So they've talked about the capability to do, as setting aside all of these other constraints, the ability to do 3 tankings in a row, but because the crews, the launch team needs to get its rest and be relatively fresh from one day to another. What they're talking about is the ability to make 4 launch attempts within 6 days, and so you have to take that constraint, and then you have to lay the launch windows, the celestial mechanics, and the windows, and all of those mission constraints on top of that. And so we'll just have to see what happens, because, as people have said, if you had a scrub for whatever reason on the first attempt, then in theory you could recycle and come back and try again the next day, 24-hour scrub turnaround. But that depends on what the problem was for the scrub. If it's just weather, then that probably improves the chances of being able to recycle, but there may be other considerations as well, including if it's a technical issue, can it be resolved in time to turn around and be set up to begin the terminal countdown, or the day of launch preparations and day of launch activities on time. So they released. So this news dump, so to speak, on Friday night, there was a lot of information in there. I went through that kind of initial takeaways from that in the video, and so I think the only other thing I wanted to mention. Let me see if I can bring up some notes. So there wasn't a lot of detail, but I have heard a few bits and pieces about final preparations. Let me see if I can. So this is this is very high level. This is a very high level look at the kind of work that they're doing at this point. So I'm trying to do something that a better highlight color. So they've been doing all of this stuff for a while in different areas of the vehicle. So closing volumes. For example, one of the things that we heard was that the Orion, the crew module was closed out. They closed the Orion hatch. They closed the launch abort system hatch. They they say retracted the crew access arm. But that it's not, since we don't have pictures, we can't tell exactly what that means. Does it just mean that the white room has sort of an inflatable dock seal that seals that area, so that you don't, if the vehicle on launch day, for instance, is being purged in some areas with gaseous nitrogen, which is an asphyxiant, and so you don't want to get, you have to. They have you hear. Frequently, they will talk about O2 monitors. They want to make sure that their oxygen percentages stay like we would normally see, which is 21% in air. Anyway, but they may have broken down the white room. Maybe retracting the CAA means they broke down the white room and there's just that little bit of space with the CAA, or maybe they actually backed the CAA off a little bit, but they can't completely fully retract it up against the umbilical tower until the beginning of rollout. When they get the whole mobile launcher out the door and clear the VAB, they will stop and then completely retract, as I noted in the video. So, but they're completely out of Orion. I believe now they've actually powered it. It's powered down. They've done some of the confidence checks in some of the volumes. But the big thing, and they mentioned it in the news release, was that they had a wire harness for the flight termination system that they found I don't know if it was a bent wire. Again, no pictures, but they had a cable that was bent funky. I don't know whether they the point is that that stopped them from doing, this is the big final test that they need to get done in the VAB, and it starts all of those flight termination system clocks. We just at this point don't know whether the durations are different. It sounds like they're a little bit. My understanding is that they're still, they certainly have not finished that test yet. It sounds like they've got the replacement wire harness in place, and they've retested it. And so, we don't know whether the test is, we don't know when the test is going to be performed, and there's obviously lots of steps in it. And then obviously the big thing is to finish it. Is it successful? Is everything check out? And do they then, can they then proceed into the final preparations for rollout? Because they're they have ordnance installations and so on, but that's kind of the last big test, and it sort of defines whether they're going for rollout. If they had some issues, then obviously that's going to, that would push the timeline out farther than it already is. And so that's one of the things, it's one of the big things we're waiting for here, is to hear that the flight termination system end-to-end test has been completed. And again, I don't know whether that's going to be, blasted out on social media. I would assume not, because it's one of those details that is why I have this channel instead of just getting it straight from NASA. But that's kind of where, it sounds like that's where we are. I also heard that, there are a few of the platforms have been retracted up around the ICPS and Orion. I don't know whether they've, we haven't heard about all of them. So there's a platform up. Let me see if I can bring it up. There's a platform up around, up around the top of the launch abort system. That's platform A. And then there's the one that's sort of underneath the, let's see if I can zoom in or make this a little bigger. It's just low res. But yeah, so the platform A is up here around. It gives them access to the motors. So the abort motor nozzles, the jettison motor, and then the attitude control motor. They have access to those if they need them. The B platform is sort of below. It's at the level of the Orion service module umbilical. And then you have, C, D, and E are around that volume with the SLS in-space second stage, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. That gives them access to that, which has an umbilical hooked up to it. Then the D platform gives them access inside the launch vehicle stage adapter, and they need to go inside to do work, although that work, I believe now should be completed. And then the E platform gives them access to the forward skirt umbilical, and then also inside if they need it. But it also sounds like that volume has been closed out, and some of those platforms have been retracted. We just didn't hear about, for instance, like platform A or platform E. Platform F is the last one because that's where the work is. And then these ones down here, G, H, and J, were retracted. We saw the picture of the vehicle with those already retracted at the time of the countdown demonstration test back on December 20th. And then, again, no pictures, so we don't know whether platform K has been retracted, but they should be getting pretty close to just having platform F. And the idea is that's why this flight termination system test drives when you're ready to roll out. They want to have it so that they have just that minimal amount of work left to complete, then retract that platform, and then they're going to be going into the final preparations for rollout. So let's see. And so I'm trying to think if there was anything else. And then, well, okay, and then just to quickly go through the launch, because there's going to be a lot of time to go through the launch period and the calendar. But let me and I can bring it up that way. This is the mission availability calendar that NASA released. The one of the interesting things, I think, if you're going, certainly if you're going to see the launch, or most people want to see it fly in February, but they have provided additional information for follow on launch periods. And so we actually can see 4 of them here. It's just we can only see the very front part of launch period 20. So this is launch period 17. This is 18. This is 19, and then this is the very beginning of launch period 20 down here. So there would be other opportunities at the beginning of May for if they need to get that far. And again, I think I've mentioned, and it's probably worth repeating from a knowledge standpoint. The no later than April 2026 is I think they call it a commitment date. It has to do with sort of meeting. It has to do with reporting purposes to Congress. And so because Orion is still in a particular part of its program life cycle, if it overruns that schedule by whatever percentage it is, and that's happened several times over the years, they then have to do another report. So they could overrun that date by a little bit. I don't know exactly how much, but they could overrun that date by a little bit without having to change the official date. So, and then I think, as I mentioned, but and it's definitely in the NASA release, once they get to, I'll just bring it up here. Once they complete the wet dress rehearsal, assuming that it goes well, because if it, they'll, as the thing says, they'll go where they need to go. If they need to make some changes and make some fixes, they'll do that. If they can do that at the pad, they'll do that. If they have to go back to the VAB, they'll do that. Just like Artemis I. If it goes well, then they will review the results of the test and do the final agency level flight readiness review. And at that point, then they will set an official launch date. But it is worth noting that, again, the celestial mechanics mean that that's one of those constraints that they can't get around. So they will have to pick one of these 5 days here if they're going to fly in February. Otherwise, they're going to pick a date and they're going to basically be, pushing it to the next one, to launch period 18 in early March. So let's see. So, okay. So yeah, if you have any questions, I just did want to try and provide a little bit of detail about where things stand. And what we're waiting to hear next, which is basically just, what's the status of the work in the VAB? Have they finished that test? Is it successful? Are they pushing ahead to roll out, as they were talking about? So, let's see. So John was asking, do you think the rollout will be at 12:01 a.m. on the 17th or in the evening? I don't. We don't have a time for that yet, but some of the times that I'd heard, hypothetical times, maybe that's probably being a little bit too. We heard some schedules that talked about evening, but it would still be, again, since we're talking about January, it would still be after sunset. So it might be before midnight, but it might still be, again, it would be after sunset, very likely that they would start after sunset. But again, when they get down to it, if the weather is okay, they'll be looking at the weather. If it looks like the weather would be okay They might be willing to press ahead. It obviously also they have to look at the crawler crew and the crews that are supporting the operation and whether they are ready to do it, early or late. So and how many people, they may have teams, they may have multiple teams, so they can do a little bit of a handover between one work shift to another. But again, it'll be, what's the lowest common denominator between all, because some of the support teams will have more people than others. Some of them will be obviously able to accommodate multiple shifts across the clock. Some of them, if you only have one crew and they can only work maybe 12 hours, maybe a little bit more than that, eventually they're just going to time out. So there's that. So yeah, we will be looking to hear, by the time we get to, if we assume the 17th, for instance, we'll have some sort of a time before, I would assume by the 16th even, but it'll also probably fluctuate again based on, as they go through the preparations. If they have something that they have to stop and work on, maybe that pushes it one way or the other, or maybe they decide they want, there's always like a call to stations at the beginning of the operation, maybe, which is hours before first motion. In this case, if they got done with the preparations early, they might decide to go early. We'll just have to see. So, there's a question: is the FTS on SLS autonomous, or is it still sort of the traditional commanded from the ground system? This version is still ground commanded. They are working on an autonomous an implementation of autonomous flight termination for I believe for the Block 1B vehicle. So they were looking at, and it's been a while since we've heard about it, but they were looking at first flight of it, maybe flying in a monitoring only mode on Artemis II, but then flying on the first Block 1B vehicle. But again, we haven't heard a status of the development of that yet, or recently. So there's that. How early before rollout can one expect to know the rollout date? Well, they've given us a date, so it says no earlier than the 17th, but for what it's worth, and we'll go back to the calendar again. They were talking before they were talking back in late September when they did the briefings in Houston. They were talking about an 18-day pad flow, and so. But there with a couple of contingency days, which is essentially schedule margin. So you have a couple of days to deal with weather, different types of weather in the wintertime than necessarily in summertime, but and just padding in the schedule to deal with issues that could come up, either weather or issues or both. And so if you work backwards from the 6th now, that kind of takes you to if you work backwards from here, 18 days, there's 2 weeks, 14 days, 15, 16, 17, 18. So you're already, if you're already here as no earliest, and I don't, again, I wonder, whether maybe they can beat that. They might not be able to beat that by, much. So maybe a day. I don't know. Again, we just don't have enough information. We don't get enough regular status to know for sure. But the 17th is already pretty close to that, to a date where if they were to go past the 19th, then you start to compress the schedule you would need, to compress the amount of time you'd need to get all the work done, and make the 6th. So if they're to start to slide into the next week, the week of the 18th or 19th, depending on how you call it, then that starts to threaten how many opportunities you might have in early February. So it's probably in that range somewhere. And then, again, we'll just have to see. But I think the closer they get to Saturday, the hopefully more of a refinement of the, as I said, like a weather forecast. It's just that they're not giving us daily forecasts. Hopefully they will start to do that here. Maybe not Monday, but certainly certainly when they finish the flight termination system test, we should hopefully have a better idea about how much work there is. And then again, hopefully if the date changes, that they will give us more frequent updates, at least give us an update when things change, and we'll just have to see. We'll have to see. But I mean, right now, I think a lot of people we're planning on the 17th, and I'm gonna give myself a little bit of extra time and get in there a little bit before the 17th. But they're also talking about doing some giving the media an opportunity to talk to a few people, hopefully some subject matter experts. There are lots of questions besides the rollout that I have, in addition to the questions you guys have. So they were talking about doing that probably before the rollout, but again, we're just going to see. If they did do an evening rollout and it takes 12 hours, then there's not going to be a lot to see until the vehicle gets to the pad. Once it gets past the spotlights and the searchlights around the VAB. But so yeah, that but still, we might be looking at coming back when the vehicle gets to the pad. So if they left on the evening of the 17th and got there on the morning of the 18th, then you might be talking about there would be other things to do at that point. So short answer is we just have to wait and see. There will be lots of people bugging them, including me, about updates. Basically beginning tomorrow morning on Monday, we will be bugging them just to get a better idea than no earlier than the 17th, which is kind of open-ended, as you're noting. So let's see. I don't see a lot of questions. If certainly I know it's a football playoffs here in the States, and so I understand. I was going to go back and look at that. It is worth noting for those of you who are football fans who are nice enough to come over and provide your patronage. Super Bowl. This is Super Bowl Sunday, the 8th, and if you look at the launch windows for, let me see if I can bring it up. If you look at the launch window for the 8th, so whoops, that's not what I want to do. So it's so 11:20 Eastern. So liftoff would be likely after. So I think kickoff for the Super Bowl for the game is 6:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:45. Obviously, there's a long pregame show, very similar to SLS. SLS has a long pregame show, and so that's the thing. If they were to end up making a launch attempt on Super Bowl Sunday, they wouldn't line up exactly, but there would be some overlap between the pregame shows, and then maybe the game is over by 11:20 p.m. Eastern. But there will be, I'm sure they'll still be talking about the Super Bowl at that point. But this is going to be, the thing is like, I'll just have to watch. I'll probably have to watch the Super Bowl, a replay of the Super Bowl later, because if you work backwards from liftoff and go back to like when the start of tanking is, you're going back 11 hours or thereabouts. So for instance, for that, if they were to be attempting a launch on that day, they would be tanking would be beginning around noontime local, and so that would be, that we will be busy, because when we, we'll go into this more as we get closer to the wet dress rehearsal, because then we're going to hopefully get a good idea. That's one of my questions to public affairs is, are we going to be allowed to monitor the wet dress rehearsal and hear how that's going and what's going on or not? We definitely, there's interest in covering that, but there, because this is only the second time that a vehicle's gone out to the pad. There, we'll be monitoring the tanking process very closely at the beginning of it. So even though it's an 11-hour, there's approximately 11 hours from when they start tanking until you get to the opening of the launch window. Like from, the first couple 3 hours, we'll be watching the progress of the core stage loading. We'll be watching then we'll be looking at the engine chill downs, the bleed flow, as they call it. And so that'll go on into the afternoon. I guess the game will not have started at that point, but then if they, the crew's going to be getting ready to go out to the pad and get on board. So that might be kind of right on top of, again, this is purely speculative, because if they can, the sixth is an opportunity. If they can make the sixth, if they can get everything done and be ready to launch on the sixth, they will take that opportunity. So, there's going to be more, having to pick between the NFL playoffs and this. And so since this only happens every so often, assuming that they're doing this, there's going to be, I'm going to be focused on this, this year anyway. So, asking, there's a question about covering the rollout via its own channels on YouTube, NASA. I think it's called NASA Plus now. I assume so. We just have not got the details of that yet. One of the things that I have on my to-do list, which I will be asking tomorrow, because it's useful, and I would be Kennedy Space Center Public Affairs, when the vehicle was at the pad during the Artemis I launch campaign, they had a live stream up, and it's a single shot, but I would take that because it's live. It's a live feed of the vehicle at the pad. Now, NASA Spaceflight, NSF NASA Spaceflight Now, both of them have camera, and then other media outlets there. They might set up an independent live stream. I'm not sure, but I would expect there to be live NASA coverage of the rollout, and then that's what I'm going to ask about, because they did it. They left it up, and so I have some footage that I've used in some of my videos of the vehicle, of the Artemis I vehicle at the pad, and so that to me would be a good background thing to be running, and not instead of some of this data, but because we're now starting to get it, but just it's a good thing to in terms of situational awareness of what's going on. So let's see. I'm working off two monitors here. So let's see. Okay, that question. Question about the heat shield. There's a really good story from Eric Berger with Ars Technica about a review that the new NASA administrator Jared Isaacman held at NASA headquarters. I'm still going through that, and unfortunately, we haven't really we weren't able to get the only details. There was also a gentleman from, I believe is a gentleman from, I want to say Micah Maidenberg with the Wall Street Journal. I have not read if they published a story about this. I have not seen it yet. The issue with the heat shield, I mean, this is where where the lack of opportunities to ask questions. I think I don't think it's a good assumption, considering all of the dynamics of the situation and what's going on. I don't think it's a particularly intuitive thing. mechanisms that were going on during the reentry and what happened. To assume that, for instance, if they were to make one explanation and say, here's what happened, which they did back in December 2024, that we're necessarily going to learn it and completely understand it after just one briefing. It would be nice to get multiple bites at the apple, and more in the vein of, if you were taking a class and learning a subject, you wouldn't just do one. You wouldn't just have one session. It would be multiple sessions. You would want some repetition. So I certainly would. And anyway, so the way that one of the things I heard in sort of a bigger picture discussing about, in 2023 and 2024, well, why are you investigating this? Why are you spending so much time on this? If it wasn't necessarily a safety of flight issue, and again, that's debatable, but one of the things that was mentioned that I heard was that they did not analyze the spacecraft for re-entering with the heat shield, with avcoat liberating in that manner. And so that could change the way, you could see a different type of erosion of the avcoat if you try and assume that you're going to accept that as a baseline way that it's going to perform. And so they did. I think that they were saying basically, well, it might not, this particular performance on that one reentry on Artemis 1 wasn't, they had plenty of margin with the avcoat material, but they didn't understand, they just didn't understand it. It took them quite a while to understand the root cause and then corrective actions. And so that's I think one of the reasons why it took so long and why it was and is a big deal. It's just that, considering that it's a big deal, there's just not been very much discussion or explanation about it. And again, in terms of repeating it, in terms of allowing questions to be asked about it, and again, this is one of those things where, again, NASA is a public agency, but it is now using commercial products, or products, for instance, like Orion. Orion has some limited rights, proprietary information, and so that's protected for those, they have protections there in terms of what is allowed to be discussed in public, and so that limits some of the discussion for that, unfortunately, because it's I don't feel like I've been given the opportunity to understand it that well. And the thing is, it isn't so much now as, during 2023 and 2024 post-flight, or for that matter, 2025. So they finished this investigation at the end of 2024, but we really never got an opportunity to talk about really anything about Artemis almost all year, other than, again, they're very limited availability, and I won't go too much farther about it. It's a pet peeve of mine. But it is a big deal. It doesn't mean that it's that they didn't resolve it. It's just that it's hard without details and opportunities to probe that, to get a full understanding. I think that would be a good way of putting it, as opposed to understanding it versus a full understanding, or at least closer to a full understanding than what we have right now. So, Dave was asking about Platform I. I think somebody mentioned it's a convention. I don't know this for sure. I wish we in these 3 years between Artemis 1, 3 and change, Artemis 1 and Artemis 2, it would have been nice to have had a chance to go through things like that. But somebody was saying maybe it's a convention because you can't that it's harder to tell the difference between I and the number one, for instance. So, but I don't know for sure. Um, is this pad flow going to be the new normal for SLS going forward, or do you foresee changes with? There will be some changes with. Well, there should be changes. Well, for Artemis 4, I would assume there will be the countdown will be a little different because it's a new upper stage, and there are some additional there will be some additional learning and testing that they will do ahead of that. It's not a completely new launch vehicle, but they will be doing more. They'll be doing verification and validation of not only the mobile launcher 2 that they're building out there. Really, the construction is more or less complete, but now they're outfitting it with all the equipment, and then you install all the equipment, then you hook it up. You still got to test it. They're going to be doing that with the mobile launcher, and then when they get the vehicle, they'll stack it, and they're probably going to do. I don't know whether they will do a tanking test of that vehicle. We'll get in. That will be one of those questions. Will they do it with or without Orion, like they did on Artemis 1, where they go out without Orion because they're really testing the Orion's already fueled. The solid rocket boosters are already fueled too, but we're just talking about loading the cryogenic propulsion stages for the vehicle. So coming back to Artemis 3, though, assuming that this launch campaign kind of validates the system that they have now, maybe they don't do a wet dress rehearsal for Artemis 3. We don't know we don't know for sure what the circumstances are going to be leading into Artemis 3 now, because there's a lot of uncertainty about what hardware is going to be available, et cetera, et cetera. But that is a possibility. Very preliminarily, they were talking about doing a much simpler, or simpler is not the right word, but a more straightforward flow. The basic flow that they talked about was, you roll out, you're hard down, you hook up the pad commodities to the mobile launcher. I guess you could call the emergency egress system baskets a commodity, but those have to be the baskets and the wires have to be run up to the mobile launcher. You do I guess I could bring it up. But the idea being that you wouldn't necessarily do a wet dress rehearsal if this launch campaign validates validates that all of these systems, because all of these systems, not all of them, but they made significant modifications to the systems between Artemis 1 and Artemis 2. And so one of the reasons that they were going to do this wet dress rehearsal, not just because they had quote unquote hydrogen leaks during Artemis 1, is that they made a lot of changes. So as an example, even without the hydrogen leaks, they are bringing on a gigantic, almost double the capacity liquid hydrogen storage sphere at the launch pad. So it was out there for Artemis 1, but now it's completely hooked up and integrated into the launch processing system. That gives them the opportunity to make 24-hour scrub turnarounds in some cases. It allows them to do more launch attempts in a shorter period of time, but that's something that they've tested without the vehicle. They tested the flow from the spheres all the way up to the mobile launcher, and there's obviously lots of valves and ways to flow cryogenics all the way up to the point where you would get to the vehicle without having a vehicle there. But now you've got the full system in a flight configuration, and so they're gonna test that. Assuming that they don't make any significant changes to those systems between Artemis 2 and Artemis 3, then maybe you're willing to not do a tanking test or a wet dress rehearsal in front of that. And so then the pad flow would be, the wet, it's all of this stuff. Maybe you do, maybe you just cut this out. that I think would at least that would eliminate, that might take maybe not quite a week, but it would take probably close to a week's worth of work at the pad out. And so you might be back down to, instead of 18 days with a couple of contingency days, you might be looking at week and a half to 2 weeks. So that there's advantages and disadvantages to that. But that might be what you might see for Artemis 3 is, or the third Artemis, or the third SLS vehicle, or third SLS Orion vehicle is maybe. But again, some of this will depend on if they make some additional modifications to the cryogenic loading systems out at the pad, for instance, or other things. So we'll just have to see, because they haven't flown this very often, when it settles down a little bit. And then of course Artemis 3 is the last Block 1 vehicle, and so now you're going to not just a new mobile launcher, but a different vehicle with the larger upper stage and so on. So there's a question about, if they aborted on the first attempt, it depends on what you mean by abort. I think they usually only use the word abort if the engines start and then shut down. I mean, it's not a perfect science, but they typically don't talk about the launch being aborted unless they go past engine ignition and then have to stop before the mission starts. And if they have that happen, then I can't think of any possibility of them flying. They would have to go to the next month. They would have a lot of work to turn the engines back around if they've started. And so, but if you're just talking about a scrub, then there's actually a little bit of a discrepancy between what we saw last year in terms of the ability to recycle and do it and make another launch attempt. What they talked about was the ability to make 4 attempts in 6 days, and this was independent. Independent is not the right word, but if you set aside the lunar launch window part of it, they could make 4 attempts in 6 days. They might not have enough launch windows or launch opportunities to go to the moon in that time, but that would give them the ability to do a 24 turnaround from attempt 1 to attempt 2, and then to do 48-hour turnarounds after that. But again, there's a lot of variables in that situation, but that's kind of what they'd be looking at, is they have enough commodities, and the launch teams would be able to support, again, sort of independent. It depends on obviously what the issues are that cause scrubs. The ability, but they have the capability to make 4 launch attempts in 6 days, and obviously they would be hoping that before they got to that 4th attempt, or within those 4 attempts, that they would be able to launch. Let's see. We have not gotten, like a lot of things, they did say they had a briefing. I can't remember if it was on Thursday or Friday, but Jared Isaacman and Amit Kshatriya and I don't know if it's the NASA chief surgeon, but they had a briefing about the issue with Crew 11 returning early. And he was asked about, Jared Isaacman was asked about that, or they asked, and Jared Isaacman basically said, at least at this point, they're not looking at a conflict between ISS, Crew 12, and Artemis II. But I guess we'll just, we'll have to see, because they didn't really provide a lot of details. And again, that wasn't the subject of the press conference. So if there are any issues or conflicts with that, we'll just have to wait and see. I think they were talking about Crew 12 in the mid-February standpoint. And so, so if we look, that would be after That would be after the last opportunity for launch period, after the 11th. But if they're going to move it up and move it into that period, then, again, it depends on what they're going to try and do. So, and we also don't know where there might be, if there, it didn't, they said that there were independent, but if there are any conflicts, one of the things I was curious about was crew quarters at the ONC building at the Kennedy Space Center. They can support lots of people there, but if you had two crews in quarantines and they had to be kept isolated from each other, it's not just the crews, but then all of their support staff. Even if that staff was independent of each other, and they didn't have any conflicts there, can you keep all of them quarantined from each other within crew quarters? I mean, that's just, again, one of those basic questions that I'm sure they have an answer to. It's just we didn't get it. We haven't had an opportunity to ask them, and we'll see if that's an issue or not. So, there's the question about mainstream media to start heavily communicating about mission. It's hard. I don't know. I would. It is interesting how I think probably the only thing we can really comment on is the NASA has not, there's been less communications about this. I mean, some of it has to do with the government shutdown. So government shutdown was beginning of October to mid-November. That's not that long ago, and 6 whole weeks off, that probably, that I can't imagine that helped, and it probably went the opposite way. It probably hurt the communications people in terms of they have to be prepared for the coverage when the mission starts and when the launch attempts are made. But it also took 6 weeks away. It took 6 weeks away from them for getting prepared for that. But then it also took 6 weeks away to do anything else. So that didn't help, but it is still noticeable, I guess, among other things, how quiet it's been, especially this last week, because they're uncertain. It sounds like the line is that they're uncertain whether they will try in February, but and so if that's the case and they're going to go in March, we'll see. I think it's a little peculiar why they wouldn't try and do more publicity about this in case they go in February. And if they don't, I don't know that an extra month of publicity is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, there will be obviously talk about the delay when it, if and when it happens, but I mean, even March isn't that far away. So, but I don't know why. I mean, so the government shut down, a 6-week long government. That's a very long period of time to be out of, to be completely out of the office and furloughed. But then, on top of that, I don't know. I don't know why we don't know. We just haven't had a chance. We haven't had a chance really to even ask that sort of meta question about why it isn't just the coverage, but the amount of coverage they're doing. So we'll just have to see. I mean, I'm looking at things like, again, I'm hoping it sounds like there's going to be more coverage when the mission starts, but I have several questions about coverage, pre-launch coverage. And again, the rollout, we were just talking about that. What are they going to give us in terms of feeds? Not just they're providing feeds to the media that are in person there at the Kennedy Space Center. So like, NSF NASA Spaceflight was getting like a fiber feed, but they have a lot of equipment and which not that many people besides broadcast networks do, but I almost would consider NSF, NASA Spaceflight, to be a broadcast network. But like a live stream feed on YouTube, that would be nice. Like I said, just of the vehicle at the pad, just, that would be one sort of passive way of at least, saying, hey, this, this rocket's going to take people to the moon, in 4 weeks or less. So, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm not sure if we ask them that they're going to give us very much there either. So we will see. Um, Launch windows in UTC. So let me I can that's right. Well, I'll just let me bring up the screen. All right, so those are. Let me see if I can. Well, that's all right. I mean, that's fine. So these are the these are the 5-ish days. So the UTC times are right here. So so right now, February 6th at Kennedy Space Center would be very early on February 7th, UTC for that first window. So I have not just like tried to do a generic search, but I would assume at this point, well, that's probably not a good idea. But I used to be able to find the Artemis I if I went into search platform and asked for NASA Artemis mission availability. You probably would get both of them, but that's probably to pull up to get this. It's a PDF with a URL. I'm assuming they're hoping that it will launch and they don't have to do another revision of this release, but question about what commercial launchers will they replace SLS with? It's I guess the way it looks to me is that and this is obviously subject to change. It depends on the politics, but the way it seems right now to me, if if a commercial entity wants to develop a launcher to replace SLS, they're going to have to do it mostly on their own, with their own funds. And so we're seeing, the two obvious ones are people that are doing that and they can afford to do that. So Elon Musk with SpaceX and Jeff Bezos with Blue Origin, both of them have the private funding or whatever type of funding, self-funding, private funding to do that. And so and again, I think, I've said, and I think both of the systems that they're developing in this class should be able to replace the SLS capability. It's not obviously perfect one-to-one thing, although New Glenn probably is closer to that in terms of it's a rocket that you can stick a capsule on, very similar to the way SLS launches payloads. Starship would be kind of more like shuttle, where it might go inside of a payload bay. But the thing is that eventually, assuming that they continue with their commitment to make these systems, and both of them have long-standing commitments to finish those. So if it's just a question of when, then once they demonstrate that those systems can fly crews, basically, as I was saying in the video, if and when Starship and or New Glenn fly their own Artemis II, which is a crew demonstration going from the Earth to the moon and back, and I don't know if it's landing on the moon or not, but if we're just talking about Orion and SLS, they're not landing on the moon. It's a crewed lunar transportation system that goes from launches from Earth, goes to the moon, and then brings them back and returns them to Earth. And so, if they can do that mission, the Artemis II, if they can do something very similar to the Artemis II mission, then you can then it's hard to argue that the government should continue to be spending the money on a system if it can be provided in a number of different ways. And you hear the faster, better, cheaper. It's absolutely going to be cheaper for the government to rent a car, rent a spacecraft, than to continue to operate, manage, maintain a full government program. And so, but again, the question is, when are those systems going to be ready to demonstrate that. And right now it looks like those two systems are going to, that readiness is going to be closer to the beginning of the next decade than right now, for instance, because they also have, they're working on the lunar landing part of it right now, and that's going to take them probably into 2028 at least. And those are not necessarily crew rated systems yet. So, well, the rockets in particular. So we will just have to see. We'll see. So, and that really is the question, because at least right now, I haven't seen any sign of wavering from SpaceX or Blue Origin about continuing with the development of those launch systems and spacecraft. And so if we just assume that that commitment is there and is going to continue through the decade into the next decade at the very minimum, really the question is just, when are those systems going to come online and demonstrate crew capability to them, from the Earth to the moon and back. The the question, well, I don't know. So the question being, do you think Artemis II will launch on February 6th? And if it doesn't, why? I don't know the answer to that question. I will say, if they try on the 6th, I will be positioned to report on what happens. The thing that the NASA release talked about, the NASA release was much, I don't even know how to put it, but it is just an interesting change in tone in the message. But they are, the way that they seem to be positioning it, they think that they want to see the wet dress rehearsal and see that the cryogenic loading systems, and all of the changes they've made at the pad, to the mobile launcher, to the software for the launch control. They've made a lot of changes because this is the first crewed flight. They want to see if all of those are working smoothly before they commit to February. But that doesn't, they will have a good screen on that from the wet dress rehearsal. So if that goes well and they get to the 6th, then that's still not a guarantee that they might not have a problem during the wet dress and then have a problem on the first launch attempt or on a launch attempt. But so there, the things that people talk about are the propellant loading systems, just because they just haven't done a lot of attempts. But to be fair, for Artemis 1, they quote unquote fixed those issues before they launched Artemis 1. But then they've also changed the systems a lot since Artemis 1. But then the other one would be Orion, because SLS is more or less, there have been a lot fewer changes to SLS between Artemis 1 and Artemis 2. They added strakes, but those are really, it's a passive system. It's not, it's a passive system. They have made some other changes, but they're, I would say, smaller in scope than the changes that they've made to Orion to add all of the crew capability to it. And so a lot of the issues that they've been working through in the last couple of months since they stacked Orion have had to do with Orion, but not completely, but a lot of them have had to do with Orion. And so again, without a lot of details about it, we're just going to have to, it's definitely going to be kind of a wait and see thing, is what happens when they get to the wet dress rehearsal. And then if they get through that, what happens when they get into a launch count with the crew getting on board. They have to get the crew in, they have to close the hatches, they have to leak check the crew cabin. They did that for the countdown demonstration test, but this will probably be one of the first times that they've done it since then. So, we'll just have to see how that goes. But yeah. And then on top of all that, I think you could have weather. So I think, again, if you think back to shuttle, a lot of times it seemed like it was better. I'd rather that the weather scrub a launch than that it be a technical issue, because in theory, the weather's not going to persist for 24 hours that you would get a different set of weather conditions. They might be worse, but they also, again, just all in all, I'd rather be stopped by the weather than by a technical issue, because resolving a technical issue could be much more open ended. So, but we will have to see how it goes. That's a good question. That would be something that the question here being, do you know how long the crew will be in quarantine? We don't know that. I would hope that I would hope that um, um, I would hope that is something that is released maybe once they're in quarantine. But that will be a question. Um, I know I was trying to get a hold of. I wanted to interview somebody on the closeout crew to go through that timeline. Um, and so if I would assume that either some or all of those people, because they would be, because they would be in close contact with the crew, that they would have to do some type of quarantine themselves. So, but I don't think we know. The crew, but I don't think the crew will be in quarantine at this point, at the time of the rollout, given that it's approximately 3 weeks, a little less than 3 weeks before the launch windows, but it will be some point L minus, since that the launches have to occur in this week, pardon me, something repeating on me there. Let me see if I can bring up the calendar just for grins, or just do it like this. Well, but this doesn't have January on it. All right, we'll do this one since I've got January in here. But yeah, we will ask, but I do not know. I do not know how when they go into quarantine. But I would assume it's probably going to be. I would assume it's going to be at least a week. I think we'd heard tentatively that the crew was going to, this again. There's the whole question about the pad flows and whether you standardize on it. This is having a wet dress rehearsal right in front of the launch attempt is not necessarily. I don't know that you necessarily would want to plan it that way. But it sounded like they were going to be coming in not just like 3 days before launch, but maybe around a week before the first launch attempt, assuming it's on the 6th. Again, that's fluid as well, but that may also be because they're doing a wet dress rehearsal. That may be because they're going to do. They also have to do what they're calling part 2 of the countdown demonstration test, and that I assume will be something. It might not be. They might not do a walkthrough of the systems at the pad, but not. Well, they will do a walkthrough, but they might not do it suited. Is what I was going to say. In their launch and entry suits, maybe they do those in something else. Those are again those are the types of details that would be useful to know, at least just from a sense of. Do they have to not necessarily stop work to do that because it's just up on that level, the 275-foot level of the mobile launcher? They might still be able to do other work around on the vehicle and on the pad systems and on the mobile launcher in parallel with that work. But that would be nice to know, and also kind of the timing of that. Would that happen? Would that happen before the wet dress rehearsal? Would it happen after the wet dress rehearsal? Again, the way that they make it sound, if the wet dress rehearsal is going to be out here at the end of January, maybe or beginning of February, that's not very much time, and you already have the vehicle in kind of a ready to launch configuration. If they get through the wet dress rehearsal in a clean, then certainly earlier, way back in March of last year, a preliminary plan was as little as a 72-hour recycle from the wet dress rehearsal to the launch. What's changed though is they're going to do the flight readiness review after the wet dress rehearsal and before the launch attempt, and so they need more time to do that, go through the results of the test. So it sounds like there's going to be more time, but it isn't. We don't know. Late January could be over here too, which is almost a week and a half in front of a launch attempt. So again, this lack of specificity, it is just means we have to there's some speculation here. So because if we look at if you look at the pad flow in general, these hard down and pad validations, those are absolutely happening first. But then and also the emergency. So these three things, these three bullets here, hard down is part of the rollout, ends the rollout. Then they will do pad validations immediately. They will also, once the mobile launcher is hard down on the pedestals, then they can set up, they can run the baskets and the wires up to the mobile launcher, up to that level of the mobile launcher. So those will definitely be done. But then after that, it's not clear when they're going to do those final program specific engineering tests, when they would schedule the hydrazine loading. And then that's because it's hydrazine that goes into the hydraulic power unit tanks. That's a hazardous operation. So they will clear the mobile launcher. Certainly, yeah, they will clear the whole mobile launcher area. So there won't be anybody on the umbilical tower. There won't be anybody obviously on the zero deck, because that's where they'll go. The aft skirts, they have to get up to the aft skirts. There are servicing ports on the aft skirts, and they'll lift a servicing cart up onto the zero deck to do that. It doesn't take that many shifts, as far as I understand, but they have to. That means they're going to be stopping work to do that. So we don't know, like, all of this work here. The big steel moves probably don't take that much time, and they got a lot of practice for that during Artemis 1. That could probably be done at any time. They may opt to do that early just to get it out of the way. But these three elements, it's not clear whether they would just go straight into those to quote unquote get them out of the way. We don't know where they're going to be on the schedule, and so. That's one of those questions about the sequence of operations. This was my best guess, kind of going into it, asking as many questions as I could. But I mean, I didn't really get a chance to talk to. I got a chance to talk to Matt Ramsey. They're both Matt Ramsey, who is the mission manager for Artemis II. I spoke with him at the very end of March last year, and then I spoke with Matt Check, who's basically the senior vehicle operations manager for exploration ground systems. But that's the last person that I spoke with about this in any detail. That was back in late August. And so the thing is, at that point, I had all of the ground to cover for getting up to the pad flow that I had all those questions about. And so I didn't get a chance to follow up on this back then. So anyway, hopefully around the rollout, or, well, yeah, it would have to be. I mean, this is going to be the last opportunity, because then when we get to the wet dress rehearsal, at least the way it sounds, I guess that's the one sort of intimation, is that there's going to be very little left in terms of launch preparations, in terms of like physical hands-on work on the vehicle or the mobile launcher when they do the wet dress rehearsal. So that's going to be one of the last tests. And then if it's, again, like I said, if it's clean, then they probably don't really want to be touching anything, as within reason. The one place that they will be going in and out of, I would assume, would be Orion. So, you might have you would keep the crew access arm extended, and the white room will be up against it, and they'll have the hatch open, except for the wet dress rehearsal. I would assume that this will be something that will be new for Artemis II, which is, I would assume that they're gonna break down the white room, and that the crew access arm would be retracted at the same point it will be in the terminal countdown for the launch. And so that's something, one of those questions again. Where is that in the terminal countdown? I know we'd heard T minus 6 minutes before, but that was 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago. Has that changed? Is it not exactly 6 minutes? So, again, this is where details are important. So, the question about, I have not had a chance to, look at the lunar phases necessarily. But those are obviously that's almanac material, but we'll just have to see. And that being the question being, will we get sort of there's a range of high definition, there's a range of time during maybe during the day where the optical communication system could be used. It has to do with Orion will fly most of the mission in a tail to sun attitude, and so and the optical communications and equipment is facing in that same direction. It's facing aft, not directly aft, but mostly aft, and so that means that in order to point that at the Earth receiving stations, the Earth and the sun kind of need to be in the same general area of the sky. If the sun was on the other side of the sky, then you're going to basically have to take the spacecraft out of attitude to do that. Which would be if you do have to take the spacecraft out of attitude, that's less time for sort of the potential for high definition live streaming. If you don't have to take the spacecraft out of attitude, then that would in theory be more. So I think they talked about, I guess, ranges from like a couple of hours to maybe 8 hours. I mean, again, I can't remember if that was the number that they gave us, but I guess in terms of expectation, it would be a few hours versus many hours in the particular, during the day. But then the other thing that we saw on Artemis I was that even with the system that they had, they did not have the optical communication system on that spacecraft. They got better. It was still very, very low rate, low resolution, it was low rate. The resolution was okay from time to time, but it was very low frame rate. But it was better than I was expecting, especially out at lunar distances. Some of the times it was kind of as expected, but other times it was better than expected. So, we'll just have to, we'll see, because I think that will be one of those things where, I got a quick chance to talk to a couple of the flight dynamics officers in the flight control room. And one of the things that they mentioned was actually even after that, but a lot of things like the actual lunar flyby plan, the observation plan for the crew is heavily dependent on when they actually launch versus, even within the launch window itself. But then the flight dynamics officers will also be calculating abort options kind of in real time, all the way through the translunar injection burn. So, there's a lot of things that will become clearer once, I think, really after you get, one of them, the optical communications will probably be, we'll be able to get a better idea once they launch. And then some of the other things in terms of the mission timelines, we'll get a better idea when TLI occurs, because again, one of those things that I heard about, somebody'd asked it, so they'd obviously heard, was there is a possibility, depending on performance of the vehicle, how much propellant they have when they launch, which launch periods, that if they're in that 24-hour long orbit on launch day, it's possible that they could come around to do the TLI burn and wave it off one revolution, but that would be waving it off not 90 minutes, that'd be waving it off for another 24 hours. So they have the capability in some cases, but not all cases to do that. And so that again could change the mission timeline if they had to do a wave off, and they could do a wave off. So there's a few things that will solidify, so to speak, when they launch, and then when they do the TLI burn. So that's going to be one of those things that there will be the ability to ask that again. I'm hoping we get there's a possibility that we'll get to do a few more pre-flight, pre-launch interviews. Fingers crossed. And so I can ask that. I'm certainly as interested in that as anybody else, because it'd be cool to get a lot, a decent amount of live stream of a high, at least standard high definition, high def quality live streaming video from the moon, obviously. So that would be cool. So, well, okay, I see somebody saying in terms of the optical, um, it's a good question, but I guess I would say they're not in terms of optimizing for the maximum amount of live stream time. I it's not. I don't believe it is. I don't believe it is one of the higher priorities. And in fact, during the pre-flight, or it wasn't the pre-flight briefings, but the briefings at the end of September in Houston, the lead flight director really wasn't making any promises. I think again they're worried about they're concerned about expectations more than I'm used to. There in the past was more of a this is just what it is, but they didn't want to necessarily promise that they were going to get great great downlink, high res, high frame rate video. But we'll have to see. But I think I don't believe it's certainly not the top priority for the mission. Let's see. So, all right. Well, I mean, I'm going to try and keep doing this as much as I can. In theory, well, since the rollout is less than a week away, at least the schedule for it, I am hoping certainly by this time next week that I will be in Florida. And then it's going to be a question of whether I have a mobile hotspot that works. But again, I think I mentioned, I'm in touch with the NSF, NASA spaceflight folks, and so I believe I saw that they've already scheduled a rollout stream, and so it's just going to be a question of, they have a great team. If for those of you who are also subscribers and members over there too, they will have you covered. It's just going to be a question of, availability and also kind of the mechanics of it. So I went to one rollout that was basically, I think I mentioned this in the members stream, the last member stream I did. I'm gonna, again, I'm hopefully gonna do more member streams, but also do something. Well, again, we just have to see how it goes. If I can't do a live stream on my own, because I do not have the broadcast equipment that these larger organizations have, I hope to be able to do something. It's something that wouldn't necessarily be, it wouldn't be real time, but maybe near real time. We'll just have to see. I'm going to try and get footage. I'll try and share as much of that as I can. I'll definitely try and see what I can get when I get there. But in terms of the mechanics, and again, they rolled out to the pad with the Artemis 1 vehicle. Let's see, 3 times, 1, 2, or 4 times. But I went to the very first one, and that was because they planned on going out to the pad for the wet dress rehearsal for that vehicle only. Do the wet dress rehearsal, lessons learned, come back, do lessons learned, blah blah blah. When they did that though, and there was a huge crowd for that, and so in terms of just the mechanics of it, because there were so many people and there was a crowd control thing, it was possible to get from the crawlerway or by the crawlerway where we were back to the press site. And so but it was not easy because you had to have escorts. And so that's problematic because I chose, because I wasn't necessarily on the live stream that time, I chose to stay out to the crawlerway, stay as close as I could, take video. But I couldn't get a signal out there, and this was March 2022. I wouldn't. There will be some people. Again, I don't have any network bonding equipment. This is a low budget channel. But and so we'll see. Again, if I can get if I can't even get a signal from the crawlerway, just an audio signal back to the NSF folks at the press site, then what I would need to do if I was gonna sit in on the live stream, their live stream, is to go wherever they're located and try and get some sort of a hardwire connection or something closer to that. So we'll just have to see how that goes. And again, one of those things where we're still waiting for kind of the agenda, so to speak, for the rollout and for the opportunity. Again, for me, even back then, and when I was writing stories, print stories, the interviews, even off-camera interviews, were tremendously useful for background and also just for reporting news. And so I'm looking forward to getting some opportunities to talk to some of these people. So there are still a lot of gaps in terms of what happens on launch day. So as an example, the crew's not going to get on board Orion until the vehicle is in stable replenish, which means that it's full. And then because the propellants are close to their boiling point temperatures, they boil off at the top, and they vent that goes to gas. They vent that off, but then that means that they have to supply a very sort of a trickle flow into the bottom of the propellant tanks to keep them full. But that's a stable enough configuration where people can go back out to the pad, other than like a red crew. And again, the red crew is only to fix problems. If a clean launch countdown, you would not send a red team or a red crew out to the pad. But for these missions, you will send the closeout crew and the flight crew out there, obviously, to get the astronauts on board the vehicle so they can fly the mission. So one of the questions, because we've never seen this before with Orion and SLS, is, does any of the closeout crew deploy before the flight crew, or does everybody go out to the vehicle at the same time? For Shuttle, because Shuttle was, that era, and you had all those switches on the flight deck, especially. The closeout crew went out to the vehicle. Actually, the closeout crew, there was a lot of switch configurations on the flight deck before tanking, and then there was a little bit more after tanking. And so we just don't know for sure. I'm sure somebody does. There may actually even be some people on the stream that know, but we just haven't had the opportunity to ask how that's going to go, because there, for Shuttle, for instance, when they got to stable replenish, then there was some portion of the closeout crew would be basically in their vehicles at the roadblock, closer to the VAB and the press site. And as soon as they got the go, they would go out to the pad, and that obviously was a cue for the people at the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout building where the crew was. That's also a cue for them that, like, okay, finish it's time to it's getting close to time to go, or it's time to go. So, but there was a little bit of a split there where the closeout crew went out to the vehicle before the flight crew to kind of get the white room and get everything set up. Maybe make sure go into Orion and make sure everything is set up for them to get in. So, but there is also the possibility, if I recall correctly, for Dragon and even maybe for Starliner, because that's a different situation though, because they don't even load the fuel on Falcon until after the crew's in, the hatches are closed, and then everybody gets out of there. So everybody who's not flying. So this is more like Starliner and the other vehicles that don't use densified propellant, so to speak. Let's see. There's a question about will the crew do telephone calls or interviews? Probably not during the flyby itself, but at least my understanding is there will be some sort of quote unquote public affairs thing for them to do, probably on a daily basis. So they will be doing, whether it's recorded or done live, I don't know, but they'll be doing something on a daily basis. There will probably be an opportunity for some sort of a news conference, but it probably won't be during the flyby, just because, and they've talked about a 3-hour window where the spacecraft will be pointed. Well, they'll take the spacecraft out of attitude, out of tail to sun if they need to point the windows at the moon, to let the crew do their observations. And so I wouldn't, that from what I understood, just listening to them talk about the timeline, that is a dense timeline. That there's I think they said they were going to do, there would be 2 crew in the windows and 2 crew, and they would rotate. The other 2 would be doing something, would be recording observations and taking notes and so on. So yeah, it just sounds like they're going to be really busy during that flyby period. They probably obviously will be talking to mission control when they can, because there will be a period where they will go out of contact behind the moon as seen from Earth. So, but there are supposed to be some public affairs opportunities during the mission. And again, I think the ideal thing, again, we were talking about the optical communication system. That's actually a test system for this first flight, but ideally you would just have it'd be like the shuttle during the Teeters years at the end of the program, where you had, most of the orbit it wasn't high definition video, but it was maximum, even if it was standard def, but they had the ability to do some high definition video because it was just in Earth orbit. So we'll one of the things that we're waiting to see is, or hopefully that they're going to issue, is the mission timeline, and that you should see little blocks, public affair PAO blocks in that. But that also will give us an idea about, again, work period, sleep period, pre-sleep, post-sleep, and so on. So that's one of those things we're waiting to see. The press kit's another thing that we're waiting to see. So well, I mean, let's see. That's not bad. I mean, so yeah, as I was saying, I was just saying, since they're, let's see, is there there's a question here about the CubeSats. we haven't heard the only sort of the only fine detail, so to speak, that we heard about the CubeSats is they had an agreement. They had agreements um, for they had up to agreements for up to 5 of them to fly, but it looks like only 4 of them made it. These are, I don't know about shoestring budgets, but these are not necessarily um, uh, large budget um, secondary payloads, and so uh, the 4 of them made it. There, if you go look in the SLS reference guide mentions it. Let me see if I can bring that up. I had it. Oh, this was, I think, in the last one. So here we go. Let me see if that's up. Yeah. Well, let me see if I can make that a little bigger. It's a looks like a well, but so here's, this is just showing the positions of the payloads around the circumference of the Orion stage adapter. And so the avionics unit, it's basically a completely independent system from either Orion or SLS. So it has its own power, has its own avionics. It does get one signal from the ICPS that then starts the deployment sequence. But then these are the four that made it. And I think, as I was mentioning, I think in either the last one, maybe it was in a members live stream, but you can see that they will be deployed in an orbit that will re-enter. So they'll be deployed in an orbit which has, at least the definition is, it will have an apogee and apoapsis of about 74,000 kilometers and a perigee, periapsis of 0. Or it's possible, again, because the ICPS is going to then make it's called a deorbit maneuver, but it's really just adjusting the reentry footprint where it burns up and turns into little tiny molten pieces of material. But mostly it's converted to energy. But they were talking about it technically lowering the periapsis to, like, I think it was like 150. I can't remember if it was 150 nautical miles or 150 kilometers, but those payloads will have to do something if they want to stay in a stable orbit. And so you can see, otherwise they're only going to get 24 hours of mission time. So you can see that the top one here, this is from from Argentina, doesn't have a propulsion system, so it is going to perform during 24 hours. But then these other ones have a propulsion system that are going to raise the perigee basically back above the atmosphere, so that they can either make multiple orbits or or raise to an orbit that's higher. That has a much longer lifetime than hours or days. So yeah, don't worry, guys, about I appreciate it. Like, again, I don't want to spend too much time on yes, yes, like and subscribe. Yes. If you anything to provide, but this is, there is no, it is not required. I'll do what I can. There's a certain sort of blessing and curse. So if you think about, again, since I've worked with NSF, NASA Spaceflight, a lot, those guys, so I'll be busy for a month. But those guys run hard all the time. And so, what this will be useful for the attention, and there's been more people have joined the channel as members, and I really appreciate that. That does help. And I guess it kind of works out, because the extra money during and around the mission is useful for covering travel expenses. So These are, unfortunately, because the schedules for these are very fluid, you end up making arrangements and then you end up changing arrangements. And so, yes, the plane tickets have gotten more expensive and the hotel stays have gotten more expensive, but there's also more people paying attention right now, and that's great. But I also want to complement the sort of more mainstream coverage, which is going to be more broad, which is what the channel's been for the 2 years that I've been doing it. It's been more about the details and more about context. And so I am sort of speaking to viewers who are familiar with the material, familiar with the programs and so on, that there's a high degree of familiarity with it, familiar with Orion and SLS in this case, but also the other exploration directorate programs like Gateway and HLS, and then the EHP, for instance, which is the lunar spacewalk suit. Exploration ground systems, obviously, we'll be seeing they're running the show for the launch. So, but I appreciate anything that you can give me. I do have that link down on the lower right to buy me a coffee. But again, it's what you're comfortable with providing, and including just watching. That's okay. And again, I will. So as I said, for the actual rollout itself, I don't expect, if I go out to the crawler way, I don't expect to get because I already don't expect to get a signal. I don't expect to be able to do something on my own out there. So it would have to be with NSF, NASA Spaceflight, if at all. But then the idea would be either before or after to come back and do something on this channel. But that will be where I would be for the sort of the main events itself. And once we get into the mission, that'll be different. I hope that I'll have the opportunity, especially in Houston, that I'll be able to do reporting during the mission. That my understanding is NASA's going to be providing live coverage of the mission. And so that's still always going to be the sort of primary source of news. But anything that I can do to provide some additional context beyond that, I'm going to try and do. It's just, again, a question of what I'm able, what the technology that I can afford will allow me to do. So, let's see. So, but I think, unless anybody's got another question, I will, like I said, there will be time. If not, certainly there's going to be a break in here. So if they roll out on the 17th, then I'll be in Florida for that. And then I'll have to come home. I'll come back here to Los Angeles area, but then I certainly when I get back, I will be able to do more, but I will try and do as much as I can while I'm in Florida for this. And then there's going to be, there'll be a week and change before the wet dress rehearsal. But then the idea would be, I would, especially if they're going to let us cover the wet dress rehearsal, I would want to be on site for that. And then probably redeploy to Houston for the mission, because that's where all of the mission activity is going to be. I'm going to miss, so I would miss the spectacular of the launch, but that's in the name of focusing on the mission. So, seeing that I think I've gotten to most of the questions. There will be time to do more next time for sure. And again, if you're a member of the channel, I'm trying to do additional things. I want to, hopefully there will be time to do something in Florida, certainly for the members of the channel. Recommendations. There's one quick one. There's somebody asking about recommendations to watch the launch. The one that I'm familiar with is Ben Cooper's viewing guide. I think he'd said previously that he would update it. He would update it when he got more details, and he's pretty plugged into SpaceX and United Launch Alliance and a lot of the providers down there. So I believe he's launchphotography.com. Let me see if I can do that here. I'm gonna clean that off. I think it's www. I could be wrong. Yeah. So this is his site, launch viewing guide. It's a very detailed viewing guide. He's been at the Cape for probably a couple of decades now. He's a great photographer. I think, yeah. So see, he hasn't. I think he mentions in here somewhere that he's going to talk about the SLS stuff. So I guess I would say watch that space for that. So what was? Let's see. Did I miss? Somebody saying question about? Oh, okay, yeah, question about the CubeSats. I think I got to that. But if not, again, if you have hopefully certainly before the launch be trying to do more of this, because as we get more information from NASA about the launch preps, launch, and the mission, there will be more information to talk about. And then again, hopefully I can update some of these things, some of these timelines. So again, before I go, I'll just so like as I was saying with some of these timelines that we don't know, like especially like the terminal, like even the terminal countdown. So these are the possible unplanned hold points, but they call them ground launch sequencer milestones. These are the ones from Artemis 1, and so it's even possible that they've modified these. But this is something that I would like to ask if I get the opportunity. Otherwise, we're probably just going to be stuck waiting to hear what happens on launch day again. But to me, that would be the worst case scenario, because I'd rather focus on. I'd rather understand this as well as I can, so that if there are deviations from it, we can focus on those rather than trying to tell, is this normal? Is this not normal? So there's, if we get that information, then that will be something that I can update this. So like, and another thing, so a couple of other things here, just that to note. So crew's going to be asked to close and lock their visors at some point. I don't know if it's inside 10 minutes or if it's inside 6 minutes. I would assume that it would happen before they arm the launch abort system, but I don't know when. And that would be useful to know. And then obviously confirming when the crew access arm retracts. We don't have that on here either. And then the question is that a GLS milestone as well? Or is it mixed in with, like, for instance, the one at T-minus 6 minutes? So as you can see, we still have a lot of holes in terms of details and what we know about the countdown and the mission and the launch. And so hopefully we do get more information in the next 4 weeks before they fly. And I can come back and present that, and then ask for questions. So let's see. I think then that's the thing. I think somebody's asking what time would the crew crew access arm retract. I believe that during the first launch countdown, the launch commentator, and his name's escaping me at the moment, but he'd mentioned in the commentary during one of the countdowns that it would retract its T-minus 6 minutes, but that's a long time ago, and we've seen lots of things that were subject to change, and so we don't know. It would be nice to get that confirmed. It's much less likely to change between now and launch than 2023 and launch. So yeah, in terms of daylight windows, let me see if I can pull. Okay, I'm willing to keep going here. At least to me, that's an interesting question about daylight launches. Let me see if I can find that graphic. It's from a paper that's on one of it's from a NASA technical paper, but it again has to do with, I can't remember if it's in here or shoot. Yeah, this will work. Assuming I can bring it up. No, wrong one. One moment. Whoops, I didn't want to do that either. It has to do with, so the short answer is, pardon me, there are more daylight opportunities, predominantly daylight opportunities, the closer you are in the northern hemisphere to summer. So like June, end of June, since it's northern hemisphere, and then predominantly nighttime opportunities the closer you are to the winter solstice at the end of December. And here we are, what, less than, was it 3 weeks ish? We're very close to the winter solstice. And then in between you have a mixture of daylight and nighttime launches. And so there are, thank you, Tony. So yeah, Daryl Nail, who, and I just emailed him too about something, and he was not, he'd emailed me back, but it slipped my mind. The reason is because of the Block 1 vehicle launches into a very elliptical orbit with a high point of about 2,200 kilometers and a low point, because they're discarding the lower stages. They don't have any ability to deorbit, so they launch into an orbit that deorbits itself. So the low point's like 30 kilometers. But they have to do that because the in-space second stage is really the second stage for the Delta IV vehicle, and is mostly used off the shelf. They did make a couple of modifications, but it's more or less that Delta upper stage. It's right on the boundary of its performance capability to send something the mass of Orion, which is like 27 metric tons, to do that TLI burn, which is on the order of about 3,000 meters per second. And so in essence, the SLS boosters and core stage provide a decent part of that performance margin to the upper stage. Again, I don't know whether I would be able to get the answer on how much of that delta, how much of that delta V is provided by the core stage, but they take, because you have that orbit and it's inclined to the equator because it's launching from the northern hemisphere. Pardon me. You get into this situation where it's the closer you are to the summer solstice, the more daylight launch windows you have. So there probably are a few when you right around the summer solstice here in the northern hemisphere where all of the launch windows are for the most part in daylight. Right now, all of them are in the are way after sunset, way before sunrise. So that's the idea. But because these are 2-hour long launch windows, you will also get, as we saw, I don't think that we got as much data last time, but you could see when you look at the chart, when you look at the chart for, there was one window, I think it was, yeah, right, on April 1st, and then on the April 30th window, again, the April 30th window is part of launch period 20. So that's the beginning, that's the first opportunity in essentially the May May launch period. It's mostly in May, or so the next one after that would be, it might even be May 1st. But by that time you're a month past the equinox, and you're getting closer and closer to the solstice. And so you get these you get these launch windows. So where you see where it says it's a little bit, it's less than 2 hours before. Well, no, okay, in that case, yeah. So this would be the other way around. So before sunset. So you have almost all of the window before sunset, but a few minutes, and then you get that jellyfish possibility of lighting. But technically, there would be a few minutes. There would be a few minutes of the window at the very end after sunset, so they can launch anytime in that 120 minutes. And if you remember, for Artemis 1, on the day that they launched about 45 minutes, maybe a little, give or take a few minutes, 45 minutes into the window. They did not launch right at the opening of the window. So, but I think I will leave it there for this time. And if you have any other questions or anything comes to mind, please feel free to leave it in the comments, or you can ask a question the video that I released this morning publicly. If you have any questions, you can leave it as a comment there, or leave it as a comment here. But I really appreciate everybody stopping by, and hopefully this time next week, the Artemis II vehicle is out at the pad, and that we have something new to show at that point, and hopefully new to talk about at that point. So, I'll leave it there, and I will, I'll see you next time. Thanks again for stopping by. Thanks for members. Thanks for showing up, being a member of the channel. And I will see you next time.